Welcome back. Privacy and the nation's security have been the topics all morning, and now our political roundtable has an inside look. Mike Ward from the Houston Chronicle and Michael King from the Austin Chronicle. Welcome, guys. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, sir.
So you both wrote articles about NSA leaker Edward Snowden's appearance at South by Southwest this week. What was something that you learned that you maybe didn't know before once you heard him?
Well, the significant point on this for Texas is that a lot of the things that he's saying are points that various Tea Party factions around the state have been making about the fact that the government is becoming much too intrusive in its surveillance of emails and a whole lot of other online traffic. And putting those two together is kind of interesting because it's been an issue, and it's come up in a number of forms in the lieutenant governor's race and some of the other races.
How did the audience react? Did they have a similar reaction?
Well, I mean, it was obviously an enthusiastic audience, and although the sound wasn't as good as it might have been since it was coming through 7 proxies to disguise his source, but I think the interesting thing is that he saw this audience as a group that would understand the technical problems and try to address those to the extent that they could.
Based on what he said, do you feel like there will be any kind of change that maybe the people here in Austin saw, or everything that has happened in the last recent months with him?
I think you're going to see a movement, and are already seeing a movement in the tech community to take some of the steps that he and a number of other folks are suggesting. Plus the fact, I think in the next legislative session, you're going to see some reviews and some discussion about just exactly what kind of surveillance the federal government can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've already talked a little bit this morning about the fact that a lot of the legislation that's coming up around the country seems to be being proposed by both Republicans and Democrats. Why do you think that it's something that everyone is kind of getting behind?
Well, I think because everyone is being surveilled. That was the distinction that he and Glenn Greenwald later in the week made about surveillance. It's one thing to do a technical version of what law enforcement has always done, which is to go after actual suspects who are suspected of doing something criminal. But to simply create this enormous haystack in which we all are stacked and do mass surveillance is a really different kettle of fish. If they're collecting all of our telephone data, if they're collecting all of our email traffic, with the notion that somebody in there is doing something, that's what people react to, because it puts everybody at risk. In our work, we rely on sources all the time and have both a professional and personal responsibility to protect those sources. Well, if the government can just, in a given circumstance, say, gee, I wish I knew who Josh Hinkle is talking to, it's a very serious threat, not just to reporters, but to their sources.
Is it something to say that, states might be proposing a lot of legislation, but because this is so much bigger than states, what can they really do about it?
Well, probably not a whole lot. I think their potential is there for them to be making some political statements about the NSA's surveillance program, but it's kind of like the gun issue. Last session there were a number of bills to restrict the federal government's authority to do this and that and whatever on guns and some other issues, and they really don't have any effect in Washington, but they make a statement, and it looks like that there's a growing sentiment around the country to either change and improve the encryption that's available to people to protect their own privacy, or to just the question is, why does the government need to be collecting all this stuff? And is this an invasion of my privacy? And are my constitutional rights being violated?
When you talk about guns, that has been a big business topic also for Texas in the last couple of years as Governor Perry has tried to court gun makers to come here. Are we going to see anything similar in the privacy sector when it comes to business for Texas?
Well, that's a good question. I think, and one of the things that people are missing is that it's the large corporations that are collecting these data and then handing it over to government on demand. One of the points that Snowden made was that in order to make it easier for the government to collect, to receive the data, they demanded backdoors and all of this vault of information that make it more easy for them to get in and look at stuff. So in effect, the notion that surveillance would make us safer is actually a step backwards. It's making us less safe. So I don't know that legislation is really a solution. That's what the argument was, is that if more people, say, use encryption normally in their ordinary communications, that makes encryption less suspicious and surveillance less effective. And so I'm already having, app companies writing to me and saying, well, we've got a simpler app for encryption. So I suspect that that's really what they were talking about at the festival, is how could tech people develop the kind of applications that would help with this matter.
You mentioned politics, and we've already seen people like David Dewhurst writing the federal government, trying to see if the NSA is looking into phone calls at gun shows and if they track people at gun shows. Are we going to see more of this kind of stuff as we get closer to the general election in November?
I think you will. I think that the overarching power and intrusiveness in a lot of people's minds of the federal government is going to become a continuing issue in Texas and a number of other states. And I agree with what Michael said, that the people to move forward on some of Snowden's recommendations is probably private business who either A, sees potential for some profit there, or they see the bigger picture and they have the ability to write the encryption software. And I think a lot of this will probably be driven by markets too. If enough people start asking for additional encryption capabilities on their personal accounts, or if they start complaining that they think a lot of these large companies are collecting too much information that they may be handed over to the government, I think that the pressure there may cause those companies to step back.
Certainly a very interesting topic to track. Thanks, guys.
Sure.
All right, several political races are still up in the air in Texas as candidates across the state prepare for the May 27th primary runoff. There are more than 20, and we have a complete list online at KXAN.com. Thank you for watching State of Texas in Depth. Join us every Sunday morning at 8:30. Meet the Press is coming up here in just a few minutes on KXAN.